Good morning, everybody. Thank you for making this nice select group up here. For those in any doubt, today's presentation will be in the English language as originally envisaged. I'm John Renfrew. I am, in fact, from the UK. Have been. That's maybe why my accent. Fabrice said last night at the meal to somebody else who he didn't know, because he's a bit of a wind-up merchant. He said, "Oh, this guy here has one of the best English accents I know," which is a great comment. Indeed. Yeah. So we're going to look at OData this morning together. It's not a how to use OData session. I did that at the EngageU Auto Enter Live conference. If you want to see the video, there's the link for it later. It's a very fast. I took 50 minutes and turned it into 25, what OData is all about. I also did a context podcast with Todd Geist more recently, just about OData. You will be getting the slides later. Don't need to do all that phony thing. If you want to kind of mechanics of how OData. What I said there was there's some extra stuff to begin to explore, and this is a great opportunity to begin to do that. Where do we go next with OData? But for those that need a reminder, OData was a way of being able to return data from a server side without knowing anything about who the underlying vendor was, who was giving you the data. So kind of a query language. Think of it as ODBC using web technology. Therefore, you don't have to have drivers and usernames and passwords that you set up. You do it somewhere else. Initially introduced by Microsoft, it's now curated by somebody else. But as a result, there's a lot of stuff in the Microsoft space, Microsoft tools, which are very good at working with OData. And for those who've worked with the Graph API, Teams or Mail or anything like that, it's all OData underneath. All the examples you read are OData. So the minute you've understood the concept of OData, you're part of the way there to understanding what's going on underneath. The big difference in our Claris FileMaker world is the difference between OData and the Data API. Data API, as you know, uses tokens and a session. So you have to ask for a token, use the token, get rid of the token. OData is basic authentication. And it's not based on returning data from layouts. It's returning the data from the raw tables. The query that you're doing, can I have some data or can I work with this data, is part of the URL string. So it's a question mark and then there's something after that. So all your stuff is in a URL string. You're not passing a JSON object in a body to be the query. It's all part of the URL. So if you understand insert from URL, you're quite a long way there to be able to use this. It's fully CRUD compliant. You can read, update, delete. But additionally, you can modify the schema in the same way that you can with a SQL plugin, for instance. And you can also run scripts in the same way that the XML engine could. You need to be on the latest versions. It works fully across Mac, Win, Linux. It does also work on FileMaker Cloud. There's a caveat there around the authentication because you have to get involved with Cognito. I don't know anybody's done that in production yet because it's really hard work. In the admin console, there's a connector that you have to go and specifically turn on OData as a channel. And then you get access to a separate log of everything you've done in OData, the OData log. Within your file, you'll need a user account to be able to use OData with a privileged set of FM OData turned on specifically. Okay? But those are the only kind of moving parts you need. Within your world, everything else after that is just insert from URL in FileMaker. And because it's basic authentication, you take the username, password, base 64 encoded, and that's what you're going to pass as the authentication. Makes it significantly simpler. So one of the first things to consider with OData is about the cost of moving data. You don't pay real dollars, but there's an allowance. All data that you're sending in via OData costs you nothing. All data that you bring back is measured and costs your client something. When you create a record, you go, here's everything I need to do to create a record. What do you get back when you create the record? You get back all of the record that you just created. So it didn't cost you anything to send it, but it did cost you the same, plus a bit more actually, to get the record back. How could we stop that? What if the data that you're sending is massive because it contains 3 or 4 base64 encoded files as part of the data that you're submitting, which is a legitimate thing to do. A lot of the way we modify the behavior within OData is in the headers that we're sending. So along with our authentication, this header here, really very useful, the prefer header. If you say, I'd like to get back the minimum amount of data possible, please, then FileMaker will obey that. If you're running your code through Postman to test it, you'll get back an HTTP 204, no content. Well, that's correct. Yeah, I just asked you to give me no content. If you're running it in a FileMaker script, you'll get a FileMaker 10 error. Data is missing. Again, you did just ask me to do that. It's not surprising. But you need to know that if you've asked for that, you need to trap for that. But as a result, you get nothing back. So you don't know, was it successful or not? In the headers that you get back, if you dump the headers into a global variable, in my case like this, there is something very interesting in there. When you have created a record, when you've posted the data to the record, you might see a header which contains a row ID value. That's the equivalent of FileMaker's internal get record ID. So that if you then say, I don't want any data back, but in the headers, I know you've given me a piece of data that's useful for me. I know the ID of the record you did just create. So that kind of confirms it got created, and I could then do something with that. If you turn that off, you get back the unique ID of the key field anyway, so you don't need to do that through the headers. Everything we're going to see now, where there's a tilde, it just means that's the first part, that's the structure of everything first. You need to know where this file is, what this file is called, and the rest is the FMI OData part of the URL. So if I said I got back something with a row ID of 24, and I said in this particular table, can I have record 24? I'll get back that record. So I've created a record, but I want for some reason to get it back. In a moment we'll talk about maybe just getting part of that back. Now that works only if there isn't another field in the table that's already flagged as a key field. And that involves you setting it up with a unique validation and no modification. If you, for some reason, have a table that has a unique ID field, but you haven't set it up to be unique or to be a key, OData doesn't know it's a key field, so it will work with the row ID. Okay? When it doesn't work, you might get something like incompatible data types. And you go, okay, that's a number. Maybe it needs to be a string, so I'll kind of wrap it in single quotes. No, that doesn't work either, because it's trying to look at the wrong field. So part of this is based on some things I have actually done to help us understand. I'm going to read this backwards. Please may I have the unique ID of this table where this field equals 24. That's what that says. In this case, this is just an auto-enter calc field, which is get record ID, that I have in all of my tables so I can reference it. So I can use this value to just get me back the unique ID of the record in the table I created. So I initially said, create a record, don't give me anything back. Oh, I know what number you are. Now, could you just give me the unique ID back, please? Because actually I want to use this somewhere else in the script. So two-stage hop, creating the record, just get a little piece of data and then just bring back the piece of data that you really want. So I've saved myself all of the bytes that I didn't need to see. I just need the data that I kind of need. If you update a record, so you're doing a patch, not a post, in the headers that are returned, you'll get back a header at the bottom here, FMOData.affected rows. If you're just patching one record, then clearly the answer to that will be 1. If you're doing a batch where you're doing multiple things at the same time, and you've turned on allow commit, allow to progress if there's a fault, and you know you sent 5 records, but the affected data rows is 4, you know that the whole thing didn't quite match up and there's something you need to investigate in the middle. So those kind of things, I'm putting them there just so that you know they're there. And then you can go and play with them yourself. That's the whole part of the point about today. It's, here's my toolbox, here's what I've discovered. Use it for yourself. You might have to, if you haven't already done so, think about a custom function to work out what is in the returned header. Here's something that I wrote. Please write your own or copy mine, I don't care. If it doesn't have this in it, then it hasn't got a successful result, so I'm returning a 500 by default, which is, something's gone wrong. If there's only one HTTP/ followed by a number, then I'm going to assume that's right. But in certain cases, what you get back is something which has multiple headers, because the first one's a 100 continue, or a 301 gone somewhere else. So you can't assume that the first time you can see that piece of text, that is the current state of the headers. So all this does is work out, if there's more than one, get me the last one, because they are logically in order. And that's for you to be able to work out whether it's a 200, 202, 204. Just a useful thing. And for those who want a little tiny sneak preview, because obviously the whole of Vince's presentation downstairs is on stuff which isn't quite here yet. Coming soon to a project near you, get last error location. So at the moment, we can kind of guess some things about where we are, but what you're going to get back with this function in a new version quite soon is a 3-line text delimited list of the file name, the script name, and the line number. Okay? So you would be able to use that in your scripts when something goes wrong. And I don't necessarily mean wrong, but there's something that you want to kind of record. But here's a little trick to using it. If something goes on in your script and you say get last error, and you do get a last error, and then immediately go, oh, there is an error. Can I get the location? The answer is yes, but you won't get the location you were looking for. The reason is because the act of doing a get last error will give you a 0 error because it did just work. So this stops working. So that's why I've now wrapped it in a let function to be able to grab both things at the same time, the get last error and the get last error location. There we go, a little tiny clue for when you start to use it in real code. That'll keep you awake, won't it? So in a bit more detail, some things around that I talked about at the previous presentations about how we extend our searching within OData. Anything that's a keyword, as in an action word, is prefaced with $. You may be used to that from other languages. It's a way of saying, treat this as a keyword, not a field name. And it's all part of the query string. Remember, we're doing this via a URL. So everything after the question mark, query starts here. Something like $filter is we're going to filter the records that we're getting back. The keywords that we've got here, some of them are really quite obvious as to what they might be doing, order by. So we're beginning to think about this in terms of maybe some SQL type language queries or other types of query languages. But these are the keywords that we'll use, and we'll see some of those in action in the slides that follow. There are 2 special keywords, cross join and batch, which don't go as part of the URL string. They go somewhere else, which I shall show you now. A cross join, I really skipped through this in the presentation. I wanted to just talk through this because I think this is one of the most powerful things within the language. We can find data in records by building the relationships on the fly, in the same way that when using execute SQL in our scripts, we can say, I'd like to join this table to this table based on this equal this, and please can I get this back? That's the kind of query we're writing. And we like them because essentially they're quite dynamic. We can change the field name, we can change the layout name, we can change what we're kind of trying to get back. You can't use a cross join to find a set of records to then write to. This is only about reading, but you are able to create your own complex queries. And in this case, the cross join, in the same way that with a batch word, it goes, so we've got a table, slash, and then the cross join. And then after that, we're going to do the filter. So it goes in a slightly different place. So in this case, we're going to cross join. We're going to join table A to table B. Okay? Don't know anything about them. There's no layout. There's no relationship on the relationship graph. I just know there's a table here with some fields and a table here with some fields. So I want to join those two tables. I'm going to filter them. In table A, the unique ID is equal to the parent ID, the foreign key field, in table B. So I've made my relationship. Yeah? If you're used to using execute SQL, that should be kind of quite clear, slightly different language, but it's the same principle. And also, so I've done a join, but also I'd like it where I want you to give me back the records in table A where the surname field is equal to, well, in my case, me. So I've built a relationship and I'm getting some specific records based on that relationship. And the reason I've created the relationship is because instead of just wanting one field back from one table, like I did with the unique ID in the previous example, what I'd like back is fields across both tables. And so for this, we use the expand. So take that and expand it. And expand it so that I've got select first field and a second field from this table, but also select that third field from the other table at the same time. Roman?
What's the context here? Will it return the record from table A and
it will
table B, or it will be like a full auto join?
It's like an inner join, so it will return any records in the first table where it's my surname, but it will also expand it so that there's any records that are in the second table that are linked to my surname, but based on this particular search. So if I have 3 records here, it will bring back multiple records from the second table. It may be to do with how your data is structured, that you have a utility table with something else in that you just want to query. It's a set of dates or a set of something else. The point here is that you don't need to be using the FileMaker relationship graph to have created the relationships in the first place. Andrew?
Yeah, so what's the performance overhead on using execute SQL? The join gives you a pretty severe performance here.
Talk about that separately in a bit when we talk about performance. Essentially what I've just done is go on the fly, without a relationship, I have something which I can control. I can control which table, I can control what the query is, I can control what fields I get back. Because obviously, while I've written that as hard-coded text, those could be variables that I'm passing in. So you could allow a customer to say, on the basis of this, over here we have these 5 fields you could pick from. Do you want 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Run that query. The query is put into the string, just gets back that block of data. And obviously the point about doing that is you're getting back JSON as the object, which you would then be potentially passing to some kind of JavaScript-y, web viewer-y, diary, calendar, whatever else. But you do need to remove some of the fluff. That's a proper answer that previous query might have given me. You get back some of this stuff because that's what OData is just giving you back, is the kind of framework. The part we're really interested in here, however, is this. So I happen to know that these 2 values have come from table A. Those 3 values have come from table A. I also know that that value has come from table B in this specific case. And if there's more than one record, obviously it's an array. So one of the things we have to consider is how to remove the outer fluff to make it useful for us. I'll do a quick demo at the end for those who haven't picked up on it. Kevin Franks on FileMaker Hacks. There's a great long article and a demo file about something called JSONator, which is a library somebody wrote that came out of some work they were doing with Node-RED. English guy, to be fair. There's another JavaScript library that will do a very similar job. There's a video you can go and watch. Demo file is great. Essentially, it's a way of saying, how could you do XPath type queries within JSON to just get back the block of data? I'll demo that file just so that you could get used to playing with it. But there are lots of other possibilities about how you might remove that extra stuff. Choose your own tool. Card windows and looping through records, using a list of, get nth record, using while. Test it against, well, what happens if you do the same query using execute data API? Obviously, execute data API is limited and bound by this file. The query I'm doing may be, in fact, on another file on another server, so that doesn't work as the alternative. Test it against how fast is it versus execute SQL to be able to do the same thing. Because what I'm doing here in this particular example is potentially using OData to query myself from the file that I'm in. Just use OData to get me back the answer that I'm interested in, because what you're giving me back is helpful for me. So there are other ways to solve the problem. This is not a panacea, shall we say. For those who are not gifted in reading the help, a couple of things you really need to pay attention to. Who thought years ago when we started, and FileMaker gave us the ability to call our field, that special field _2 version 7, that it was a mistake, particularly when it had a hash at the front. This caught me out. Maybe it's obvious because I stopped using spaces for execute SQL, but in OData, you can't use underscores in your field names either, and expect it to work unless you wrap the field name in quotes. Okay? Correct, in the field name. All date and times that are date and time timestamp fields are coming back in ISO format, so that's YYMMDD. So if you haven't already, a custom function to potentially translate that into your local system will be really useful for you. On the previous example, if you saw it, there's a count. So I asked for the count in the string, $count equals true. This gives you back the equivalent of the portal, not the filtered portal. Okay? How many records match this query in total? Not how many am I actually showing you. So you can't use it as a quick version of what's the array value, how many values are there in the array. It will, however, tell you how many the total match the query. And in the headers that's returned, or in the data that's returned, you'll get an @OData count with a number. So for those who are kind of haven't, again, got up to speed with that, to be able to query this value, however, the new notation which allows us to query JSON keys that have periods, dots in the name, involve you wrapping the initial name in single quotes, wrapping them in square brackets, wrapping them in double speech marks. But it absolutely works. So to be able to get this value back, you need a query that looks something like that. So in a real-world system, something that I am actively involved in, I work with student data in the UK, and we have to return progression data to the government on a regular basis. And it's mandated that this is in XML. There's lots of reasons for that, some of which are very bad. I made a design decision, so they have just changed the model. We're beginning to work with a brand new model this year. The model is significantly expanded from what it was previously, and includes a lot of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren dependent nodes. Okay? I took the decision that As we all know, unstored calculations are in fact the work of the devil. They will slow your system in a way that you really don't want, or need most of the time. Because there are so many dependent children down the line, using XSLT was going to be quite a complicated way of doing this, to be able to export the data from FileMaker to the XML in the end. So I chose to explore, could I pre-compose the XML at this point in the node? Understanding there are some children down the line, but I could pre-compose the XML so that at the top I can say, here's all the records, grab all the XML that I've got from those parents that should reference all the things down the line. The issue clearly is if I change one of the grandchildren pieces of data, I have to find a way for it to cascade up the tree to where I am now, because it won't automatically do it because I've turned off auto-enter calcs. So I've been experimenting with, and I'm actively using, how OData could help me in this specific case. To be able to say which are the pieces of data further down the tree that right now I need to consider updating. Simple update mechanism, which is a field which you just replace the field contents with itself. That'll trigger record update, that'll trigger the XML to update, and if you do that from the bottom up the tree, it'll cascade upwards. So a couple of things I learned along the way. Clearly the query language, things like EQ for equals and LT for less than, which normally fits in the brackets. You can use the word contains, but that goes outside the brackets. So in this case, I'm going to filter some records where the return ID contains that value. And that works if it's a multiple checkbox with multiple values. So that would give you 21056 carriage return to 2056 to 3056. But because that field at the end does contain this, I can say that record is in this set I wish to update. Thank you very much. Also discovered how to, but clearly one of the ways we build queries is start with the answer we know we want and then work out how to get there. In this case, I wanted to know if the end date is less than 12th of November, that's English writing, obviously, or it's null, and also it's after the 31st of July. Okay, so that's what that query is saying. So that will find me anything where there are values in both of those fields matching those conditions, but also find a value in this particular case where the start date hasn't yet been set. It will give me that back, that record, because something else about that record may have been updated. Just there for your kind of, we can have a conversation about how I got to that and maybe whether that's useful for you. It took me a few rounds around the loop to try and work out how to get what I was after. So we're filtering the records to get the records I want, and then I'm doing a patch to a single field with a value of 1. Very, very simple OData query. In the demo at the end, I'll show you it actually working, because it does work. Why OData and not perform script on server? Well, because I like to experiment with things. I want to see how far we'll go. Perform script on server, we're quite aware. First of all, it's quite difficult to abstract. You can run perform script on server by name, but that's its level of abstraction. We've kind of thought all along about one of the issues with perform script on server is it goes to the server and it has to generate a whole client to work in, and the resources that it kind of can do. If you're doing multiple things at the same time, that's why there's a limit on perform script on server that you can lock down to how many multiple sessions you want happening at the same time. It can be very resource intensive. If you're just creating records, then you don't need to be doing that to perform script on server and here's my payload. You can do it via OData. It's not creating a session just to do that. We're going to talk about one case where that's not specifically true. But the big thing for me is that this is done without layout context. So our current methodologies to work with any script that we pass into a performance script on server is we have to have a layout to go to. To go to here, to a new window, to this layout, to a find, all that kind of stuff. There's quite a lot of overhead there. When actually what I'm potentially wanting to do is literally just write some data to a table. And the big thing here is that I don't have to bring records back to me to process. That's why we use performance script on server. Keep the data on the server. I don't want to bring it here to process it to then push it back, because that's a waste of bandwidth.
Yes, on the previous slide you had another date format, but here you're using...
No, that's because I know that field there, I know that field is in fact an English date field, and that works.
That works, okay.
Yes, because I've wrapped it in single quotes.
Yeah.
That's the question.
So I know that that's a date field. So I have a sister date field because in the XML I have to return it as ISO format, so I can do a conversion to it.
Yeah.
But I don't query it with that because actually that's more natural for me to read.
Yeah, of course.
And for the users to input. No, I appreciate it's English date format, but it still works for the 11th of December if you're American.
Yeah.
Since we're asking questions,
Yes.
can you go back one slide, please? You use the contains
Yes.
function. Is it properly multi-key aware?
Yes.
Or perfectly?
Yes.
So 220561 will
So
not
this-
be found.
That's a multi-key field. That is in that.
Right, but if you have a field, a record with ID 220,561, are you screwed or not?
No,
Okay,
it works. And go and try it yourself.
perfect. Thanks.
So one of the great things about OData as well is we can control the answer that is returned to us. We're doing a query, we want an answer. But we can control the answers that we get back. How? By running scripts. So to run a script with OData, there's a special scripts table, and that's the name of the script that we want to run. That's the notation for how we run a script. And we can pass, the only place we pass JSON into OData is here in the body. If I pass something that says script parameter value is the key, anything that's in here will be passed to the script that I call via OData. Okay? At the other end, in the script that's receiving, then get script parameter will pick that up. So this will interpret this. It does run the on first window open script. The reason is a script needs a context in which to run. Okay? Now what I haven't fully investigated is what's the difference between the level of resources that are consumed by running a script through OData versus doing it by perform script on server. I haven't quite got there yet. As in, what I'm doing is relatively low use case, but it does actually work. But what that means is all of the things like errors in your scripts are in fact logged in the error log. And the whole point is it needs context. That means that in your on-opening script, where you're already saying, oh, if I'm running on the server, don't do the rest of the opening script, you might have to test for whether the privilege set of the person that's currently running it has FMO data to skip over the opening script, because that could catch you out. I cannot tell you my biggest bugbear with seeing other developers work, the only one I really have, I can cope with all kinds of naming conventions, is people that can't finish their script with an exit script step. Honestly, it's one piece of code, you only have to click something. It means you can put a marker on it so you can stop, so I can see the variables before the end of the script, before I've jumped on. Please stop doing it. But the whole point about this is you're in control of what is returned to the calling script. Pick some kind of structure and then stick to it. If you put anything in here and you call the script via OData, you'll get back whatever I sent as the result parameter within the returns JSON. Okay, so the code is, that worked successfully. This is what was put into there. Just a quick example of something I might send back. I'll talk about why in a second. The goal of modular programming, for those who followed all of that discussion kind of 8 or 10 years ago, was this: writing some code, solving a problem once, and then maintaining that code in one place for it to be used everywhere in the system. Preferably, because I just solved a problem that I could use somewhere else, so I could get paid for doing it all over again, but I'd already done the work. Maybe. Or at least, at the very least, lift that piece of work to another client's project with very little modification. But also, potentially, what about hosting something about this code on a totally different server temporarily while you're testing? Your testing server may be going up and down, but I want this to always be available. I'll run it on a little test server that you know is always up, for example. Obviously, card windows gave us some great insights into being able to use things from other places that were particularly good for things like pickers, date and time, searches, display things. What if we want to treat this as like a machine file, potentially, that could operate or calculate in another file? Well, the old way of doing it at the very beginning was, from this file, I had to have an external data source to this file over here so I could use scripts in it. And then later, FileMaker gave us the ability for this path to be a $double variable. As you know, that comes with its own overhead. Like when you forget to run the script and then you want to edit the script first and it goes, oh, I can't find that file, and the only way to deal with that is to close the file down and start again. And it's not dynamic. You can't change that halfway through the course of using it to point somewhere else. What does OData specifically bring to the party here? We're not doing a data API because of the tokens. So I can create records, but I can also run a script with a payload, and then I get to choose what's being sent back. Everything about this is in fact then dynamic. The server that the file is on, the file name, the script name, the parameters that I'm sending, everything is coming from me outwards and is all potentially modifiable. So let's see how far we might be able to get with that as an experiment. I wrote a couple of articles about 5 years ago about doing this with card windows. Spent some time with the amazing Jason Young in America, and we discovered a way to kind of trap this file with an on-timer script that when you open a window, card window from this file over here, it puts this script into stasis. So that enables to do something but then pick up the result later. Those are the articles you can read. So here's a conceptual idea. File A. And in the middle somewhere we have this file which is a machine. I want to talk to that machine file and get an answer back. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to run a script and get the result back. Advantages, once that's set up, well, I can use that in this file, and I can use that in this file as well. So that's modular programming on one level. This thing's doing its thing, but it can be talked to by several different files. With OData, there is no link from this file to this file in any way, other than the link that is in your code. And that code could be in a table, it doesn't have to be in a script. Okay? There is no link from this file to this file, and you're in control of what's returned. What if what you ask this file to do is to operate on a third file? So I pass you some data that says, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like to run this script in that file over there. What do you need to know? You need to know where it is, what it's called, what the script name is, and what the parameters are. You'll give me back an answer. I can pass the answer back to you. There's no link from here to here. There's no link from here to here. There's no link from there to there. There's no link from there to there. Those three files are potentially completely independent on different servers in different parts of the world.
That's a security scare story.
But maybe not. That can be extended. So that instead of this file just running on, this file operating on that file there, it can subsequently operate on another file on the basis of the answer that I got back. And that clearly can be extended. So, could you do this action in that file over there. Tell me what just happened, and if it's successful, log it in file C. And if it's not successful, log it in file D, please. And then combine the answers and tell me what the whole result was in the first place. And it doesn't just have to be from here. Now I can make that work from multiple original sources. What kinds of things could this machine do? OData type things. Sending a graph API message. Generating a Teams chat ID. Security. The only place that you need your OData passwords are in this file. Not in this file. If this file only has a full access user account and a limited user account with OData privileges, nobody else ever can see any of your security details without either of those two pieces of information. In fact, they can only see if they've stolen your full access password. So you've locked some of the security issues into here, because all I need is the OData name to run a script. I don't even know what the script is doing, I just know what the script name is. So what, those other files down there, what could they be doing? You could be using that file to send emails in a generic way, send SMS, so on the basis of what I've asked you to do, either send an email or send an SMS or some other notification to any other channel. After you've done that, I might want to log what the initial request was, what the answer was. One of the topics of conversation around the community at the moment is how to use PubSub. Being able to say, create a record over here and then have some script later on deal with it, because I don't need to do it right now. But there we go, as part of that chain of command, just tell somebody later that that did happen. Maybe once an hour, give a roundup of how many things happened in the last hour. And one of the places where I am in fact using it is around user account management. So in some organisations, they do not have the resources or the skill or the time or the energy to be managing Active Directory, Open Directory, or even things like Keycloak themselves. Partly because of IT skill levels, partly all kinds of other reasons. But what you really want to do is put the user accounts into the hands of potentially IT or the HR department together, but not in the main user file. Obviously, FileMaker Claris gives us lots of native script stacks to be able to manage that. Some of you hopefully would have used them in the past. What about the possibility of being able to set up a user account in multiple files with a separate password in each file, with a different privilege set in one go? So how would you do that at the moment if you weren't using Active Directory? Well, you'd have to go into each of the file, open it up, have the username, make sure you've got the right privilege set, set the password, blah, 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 blah. And you're in control of it, you've got to do all the work, no IT. Or you've got to allow IT to be able to do that. And there's a possibility, frankly, of messing it up, isn't there? All you need to pass to the script in the payload is, what's the file, where does it live, what script do you need to run, and please, here's the data that you're going to need to act on. So something like this would be a kind of valid JSON object. I want to make that account name with that password, with that privilege set on that server and that file, and I want to add it, please. So that's the action I'm sending to the man in the middle, which could then go off and do that in multiple files. And we can see it working, if you're really very interested. So first of all, really quick.
I have a little question. So OData is only has access to the data in the file itself. It doesn't have access to data from external data sources. Is that correct? Or
so it doesn't have access to ESS sources, but
it does has, because it's table based.
Yes.
But if the table resides in another file linked with via external,
that doesn't work because it's not using the FileMaker relationships.
Yeah. So you only can get data from the same file.
Yes, but you could be doing multiple queries
Yes, to another file.
across a different. So there's a whole data separation thing here.
Yeah.
So your data file has just a bunch of tables in it, has no relationships to each other for any kind of reason. It's literally just silos of FileMaker data. And this is a way of querying that. Yes, you can say, could you find me the unique ID of some record here? Then could you go to this other table in this other file where I know there's a store of data and grab back all the history records for this unique ID, please. So, there are multiple ways to consider using it. But no, it doesn't use the FileMaker relationships. So therefore, that's why some other methods may not work for you here. This is more of a, what else could you be doing? Let me see if I can. I just need to crash out that a second. If you download it, this is the JSON demo file. There's lots of kind of examples of how it works. Query language that's there, if you've ever used it, is what's built into Node-RED. So if you do a query on the JSON object in Node-RED, you're actually using the JSON language. So as a quick for example, I've got a huge kind of array back from the type of query I showed before, where I've got multiple fields. What I actually just want back is some parts of that data. So I write a query. The point of this exercise is not for you to learn that, but to go off and download the demo and start playing with it. It absolutely works. To trim this down, I could potentially be using that array in a JavaScript display object. You're in control of what's returned, both in terms of fields, but you can also be adding your own key values within that. So you get back either as a block of data, but you can also get it back into a script. Just wanted you to be familiar that that absolutely works. Go and download it, play with it. It's a very interesting concept. It's using JavaScript and WebViewer to do the query. There's a tiny little delay, but it absolutely works. Let me show you this one. So this is a record. I was talking about, so I've generated a local XML object at this point in time for this particular person. And we've got postcode here, UK postcode, BR8 7LH. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to just go into the right place in that record and, sorry, that's not the right one. Entry profile. Here we go. I'm going to change the postcode to 7LA and go back to here. So I changed the grandchild node. It hasn't yet changed in here. That postcode because I haven't refreshed it. So my script goes off and finds all the correct set of records to update, and that's it done. If I now look at the XML node, it has now changed that to 7LA. Okay? So that's my way of kind of going, if you need to refresh the data that you've modified downstream, that saves me all of the time from the pain of unstored calculations, because I only really need that if I need to display it, or if at a point in the end, when I need to validate it and or submit it. So that's using OData to run a script to update the children up the tree from where it was to be able to cascade upwards. Okay. If you want to see that in a bit more detail, you can. So, here we have a user's file, and here we have some other demo file. And just to prove it, in this demo file, those are the current user accounts. Okay?
Do not ever view it.
Do not ever delete. Please, do not ever delete. So, the users file has no, let me just prove it, file manage external data sources, no external data sources. I'm going to run OData scripts to make what I'm doing work here. And I'm using a file in the middle to do this job, but I'd like to set up this user account with an account called testing. Let's make that password 1234 just for the sake of this exercise. And I'd like to add the account. Okay, it's gone and done it. It's given me back some answers, which I now know it's worked. So there is an account there that's been set up. So this user could now go and log into that file with that privilege set. And it will guarantee to have 1234 as the password. I decided that person's gone on holiday, so I want to suspend their account. So I've just suspended it. So go back into here. Under security. It's been turned off. Clearly, same principle to delete it. Question would be why? Other than John's just experimenting, and isn't that really kind of interesting? For testing, I have a user that wants to be able to test a new system as different users. The quickest way to do that is to either set up 16 different accounts all with different privilege sets, or be able to say, right now, you can get into that file with this password and you'll be a testing user. If I set this here, I'm not going to do it. If I set that to the director level and then I reopen the file, it wouldn't work because I turned everything off the directors at the moment in the standard file. I'll show you that kind of separately. So for testing, to be able to suddenly go, oh, you want to be a different user for the afternoon? There you go to this file, change the privilege set, click the button, there we go, update your account. Thank you very much, you're now this. Which means I can test whether or not that user is properly set up, whether all the scripts work as expected. In this particular case, I've also been investigating, could you have a generic user profile? So in all the files that I choose, that user would normally be under the testing account. But specifically in this file, I'd like that overridden to one different user account from the available list, list of users. So what's it doing? In this file here, I have a log of all of the things that I asked it to do. Run that user account workers script with that payload, thank you very much. And that's the result I got back. There was no error, but I did just set up that user in that file. So within the man in the middle machine file, I'm logging what I asked you to do. I'm also logging the headers and the trace, just for troubleshooting purposes, when it doesn't quite work as expected. In this particular file, one of the other subsequent files was after doing an action, could I just log what specific changes were made to this record from the start of today to the end of today? So that if somebody, this is a director wants to see just those occasions when somebody modified the postcode or the phone number on this record. Who did it at what time? And this was a way of combining the logging with the other actions that are happening as a result of somebody clicking a button at the end of the process. So using a JavaScript web viewer to just highlight visually the changes that were made between the pre and post start of record. So the director just needs access to this, because this gives him the answers that he's after. He doesn't need to be given access to other parts of the file for that to work. He just needs to be given access to this file. He can have one privilege set for him. If that's the job he wants to do, he wants to track things down forensically later. Just put it in a separate file. And something else that we have within this, we pick that user again, is the idea of a star rating. That's not about performance, that's about what this user can do within the file. So remember that the user's file is sitting on the IT support help person's desk. They have access to it. Nobody else does. But in the file where the data is being used, what if the person who's the team leader wants to be able to modify this star rating, which is in another file? So I've separated everything, so I've got to use OData for the same kind of thing. Well, let's see that at work. So on the basis of, I now want to set, there's only one user, and I want to set the star rating for this person. It's currently at level 5. So I'm in this file, which has no connection to this file over here, remember. I'm going to set this person for some reason to 1. Now let's be generous, let's set them to 2. Okay? So what you're watching is over there. Dialog box gets in the way. This file has set the value in that file over there. So now when this user logs in again, it can pick up his user details with the user details that the team leader just set. But the team leader set it from here. Team leader doesn't have any access to that file. He doesn't have a password to it, but OData does have the access to be able to run that script in that file. So I've separated where the user accounts are managed in a way that makes sense to where the data from the user file is being used in a real kind of world. So as I said, the kinds of things we can be doing there in some of our other peripheral files are PubSub. Push a record into a table that a script picks up once an hour and just processes. And change logs, that's what I've just shown. Writing error logs. Error logs don't always have to be about errors, they can be about successes. What about a position where you sent an email with a report to somebody and they then maintain later they didn't get the email and they'd like to resend it? The problem is if you run the report again, the report is no longer valid because it's based on data from now, not 9 o'clock this morning. If you have stored in some kind of log table everything about the email that you sent, what time you sent it, who it was sent to, what the message was, and something about the attachment, I can then go back to this log file and resend that to the same person, or I can forward it to another person if I want to. So it's not just about logging failure, it's about logging success. So there we go, that's a kind of, well, how far could you go with that data? Maybe you could go further than you considered. I certainly have pushed the doors and the boundaries a few ways. Hopefully got to a point where I've opened a few little ideas for you. Happy to take any questions. Clearly, apparently it's now early enough for lunch, but I'll happily talk to anybody for as long as you want to about OData. If you need to or want to go, please do. If you want to ask questions, then hang around. Andy.
John, if I were planning to use the data API, having seen what you've now got, 60 minutes by total knowledge of OData you've just given me, why would I bother with the data API when I've got OData there?
Because it came first. You'd invested all your time and energy on it.
Not yet.
Some people like the token thing. It's to do with where the control is. To make the data API work, you have to have a layout with fields on it. That layout gives you back the answer from the fields that are on that layout. So for developers, you're in control of what's returned. The problem is when somebody says, oh, can I have this field as well? You have to go into layout mode, drag that field on, and then it may modify the answer you got back from different queries that are using the same layout. So while you're building the payload that you need, you're also extending the payload that you need, and that may not always work. So then you have multiple layouts that you're using for returning data. So the management of this is down to you as a developer, or somebody you have allowed to go into layout mode. Do you want somebody in the company without your privileges to go in and modify layout mode to then accidentally delete all the fields on the layout? to put on different ones, and then all your scripts break. No, thank you very much. But also it's about time and effort. If you've abstracted the script to a picker, saying pick the fields that you want in this answer yourself, I'm hands off. There's nothing for me to modify or fix anymore, unless somebody says, oh, can I add this field? Just add it to the value list. Okay? So it's about where the work is and about how you set it up. If that works for you and you have that fixed and you're never going to change it again, Data API will do the job. However, you do have to get the token, do the query, and then to be a good citizen, you have to get rid of the token. 3 calls. OData, 1 call. The answer to the question is, I'm not quite sure either. Okay?
Part 2, have you got any experience of doing this with the FileMaker Go to serve?
Yes, so I'm using this with a client who is collecting data in the field. They're doing servicing, they're taking photographs of those, in fact. The inside of those, there are valves which close when there's a fire automatically. They have to be inspected by law every 6 months. That's what this guy does for a job. They take photographs proving it was open, proving it was closed. And the field engineers are syncing the data back to a central server using OData, 1 record at a time, but it proves that the record got there. And at the same time, because somebody else has a different iPad and is on a different site, I can pull the sites got submitted. I can also pull all the sites back down. So if you take this iPad to that site tomorrow, the site's already set up. So I'm using OData in the real world for somebody to do syncing with a Go app. Yeah.
I just wanted to extend on your question. The other reason I believe why you would want to use Data API is with Data API you're talking to FileMaker native interfaces. I'm pretty sure OData needs to be first translated to what Draco understands. You know? So, and we know that, for instance, Execute SQL was a great idea, but it turned out to be implemented not so greatly. You have, and I kind of suspect, I'm not sure about that OData will have the same kind of issues or similar, because I don't know for sure, but I imagine it is translated as well.
But it's doing the same job with a different input and output as the XML gateway is doing. Essentially, that's a translation layer over the same thing. But because it's baked in at the server level, it's not going, here's an answer, oh, now translate. There's some kind of translation going on. But because it's been written by Clay really quite close to where the data is, we're going to assume that's a bit more performant than how they execute. So the issue with Execute SQL is the problem is it has to work on local data. The reason it's slow is because it has to bring 10,000 records down if you're asking a query on an inner join on a second table from somewhere else. It's to bring all the records down. This is not bringing the data down. This is saying doing that source. So even if there is a slight overhead, no data from records is being transferred across the wire backwards and forwards. It's all happening at the server level. So that's one of the reasons it is therefore more performant. So there might be a timing hit, yes. Execute the data API, same kind of problem. But execute data API script step, the same problem, bring all the data back. Execute data API, three calls to do the same job. And you've got to store the token and store when it was valid. And there are reports of the fact that the tokens, even if sometimes you say get rid of it, it doesn't get rid of it, and you end up with ghost sessions, which can, in the end, do some more damage to your server in terms of performance. So.
Did you do some performance tests between Data API and OData to see, okay, which service is quicker in creating records or getting records?
My testing was, I don't like that. Let's do this and see what happens. So no, I haven't back-to-back performed.
Yeah, just to see.
I tested them, but clearly my initial gut reaction is 3 calls versus 1 call has to be slower, even if it's in the region of 200 milliseconds we're counting. That's the thing about where does the effort go? 2 extra calls at 200 milliseconds, 50 times an hour, adds up in terms of user time. Once you start multiplying that by days and weeks and months, suddenly it's a level of performance which I think is worth. For me, it's an experiment. I agree a lot of this is experimental, but the stuff I've shown you today is actually working in customer systems, and I'm happy with it. So it's not just, oh, it's a playground, maybe I'll abandon it later. I've got there because we're actually using it.
Just to clarify, sorry.
Okay, how about security? You're sending the password in the URL.
So you are sending the base 64 version of the username and password in the URL.
In the header.
In the header, not in the URL. So that's a little more secure. Secondly, this file in the middle that it needs to operate on has two accounts, a full access account so you can get into it, and a user account with that username and password, with OData turned on, with everything that you don't need turned off. So if somebody could find out what the username and password was by decoding that string somehow, and could try and log into your file. We can't log in via FileMaker because that's turned off. You could craft an OData query to see what might be there, but you don't know what is and isn't there, so you've turned off all the tables and all the fields you don't need to limit it down to the query. So you can only run the scripts, two scripts, a dispatch script and a return script. Those are the only scripts that will run. No other scripts will run. So yes, as ever, caveat emptor. You have to test it, be really careful, work out what's... But I think you're in control enough of it to go, that's within my bounds of, I'd be okay with that. Because I've locked it down as much as I think I really could. If I want to do a whole bit more, then maybe I shouldn't even be using that methodology to query something from the outside. Maybe I should do something else. As ever, it's about what's your use case, what are the parameters the company you're working for, about how security works. For me, that's enough though. This file in the middle contains all of my OAuth passwords. Again, nobody can get in and see them, only I can. The script can use them. It can contain other passwords to other files. Nobody else can see it, unless they've worked out. You have to be pretty smart. Well, clearly, crooks are. You have to be pretty smart to work out what's open and available to you, and can you make use of
The
that.
session is recorded, and you said it how it works now. So now,
There are several other sessions on security. Please send all your little seats to somewhere else.
Is the session still when you perform a query? Is the session
The
closed?
session is terminated immediately.
Immediately, okay.
Yes.
So there's no memory footprint.
It happens so fast that even if you're logged into the admin console and you run one of these, you can't even see the user.
Okay.
The refresh
So
time in the
it's
admin
reused like
console
the
doesn't.
PHP XML
Yes.
engine. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So effectively, go in, do the job, get out. Thank you very much. And it appears to not create ghost sessions. Now, don't quote me on that. You know, I'm not testing it with 500 users yet. I'm testing it with a small number of users, but it's certainly performant for the use cases that I have. Isn't it?
Just a hypothetical question, not the system you're doing, because I can imagine that's producing the job sheet for the engineers going out doing the servicing. If you had a FileMaker Go app that was just syncing one way,
Yeah.
so the data is going into the server and remaining on the iPad or be deleted in the future. Am I right in thinking the cost is negligible as it's going into the server like the data API? But I'm assuming you get a small cost due to the return you're getting back to the iPad for the confirmation.
Correct,
Yeah.
but it's a tiny cost.
Yeah.
So the example I showed was, here's a record, push this record off to here. Did the record get created? I got back the row ID. I do a second query to get the unique ID. I store the unique ID in the sending record so I know that it was successful. I move to the next record. What we're talking about, 197 bytes for that little thing. So yes, there's a tiny cost. You have to go some to burn through your 2 gigabyte data allowance with 197 bytes at a time.
Test any video going back.
You have to base 64 it. There's some special use cases about OData only works with PDF and JPEGs natively, and to be able to upload files, everything else you have to base 64. I wouldn't be sending video because that's just a massive thing from Go. Why are you doing that in the first place? Do it a different way.
Do you know if there's Claris is going to execute the OData scripts that
I
like
don't.
there is a execute data API script?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I imagine the answer is no, because we have access to it through insert from URL. You have to be in control of the headers, as well as the URL and the query, so it would be difficult to see how you could turn that into a script step. The whole point is we already have all the tools that we need to do the job. You need to set up the URL, set up the headers, set up the authentication, paste that in. There are different ways to do that. We have all the tools that we need at the moment. Yeah.
Do you happen to know whether the price of the data is comparable to data API?
The price,
Yeah.
as in the measured cost.
Yeah.
The measured cost is in bytes returned. So I showed you there's a little bit of extra fluff around what OData gives you back. That's because if you query any OData system, you'll get back an answer that looks like that. Because as part of the standard, you're returning the things that start with OData. So FileMaker is adhering to that as a good citizen. What that means is that anybody so here's the thing, anybody else who knows OData is in a Microsoft space. So you can set up FileMaker file as an OData source to Excel or to Power BI. I've demoed it with somebody. What's the advantage of doing that? You don't have to set up an ODBC driver with a username and password. Is setting up a local ODBC driver with a username and password more or less secure than sending base64 encoded username and password in the URL headers? I don't know the answer to that question. I know which one I think I might prefer. So anybody else that knows OData can query your system if you tell them, a web developer. So the system that I showed, the first part of that, is somebody wrote a web app that collects leads for this company, pre-processes them, and if they pass the threshold, they run a script in my FileMaker file via OData, and I return to them the unique ID of the record, so then they know what's done. Web developer, I don't understand the languages even used, I don't care. All I need to know is if he queries that script, he gets an answer back about whether it's successful or not.
I think I misunderstood. I thought you meant real financial cost.
Yes, there is a financial cost. So per user, you have 2 gigabytes per year data allowance. It's
Same
part
as
of your
data
license.
API, yeah.
Exactly the same, and it's all part of the same box, whether you use data API or OData. What is measured is the number of bytes that are returned to you. If you're control of how many bytes are returned back, you can make more calls because you're pulling less data back.
About running a script with OData, I think there is a difference with the data API that you can control what's given as a result with the exit script. But with the data API, if you just run a script, you cannot give it.
No, that's not. No, everything I showed is running OData and being in control of the exit. So you're running a script. So whatever is in the exit script step is what you return. Whether it's data API or OData.
Benefits. That's one of the benefits for OData because with the data API you cannot.
Yeah, you can. You have a script result in data API as well.
You can.
Okay.
It's the same
Because
structure.
it's not in the documentation.
That may be true, and even though I said read the documentation, don't always trust it. It's not always complete.
Yeah, because I was just reading the documentation and OData, it's documentation is telling that you will get the script result back what you was given, you gave it with the exit script. But in the data API, you just run a script. In the documentation, there is no.
No, you do get the result.
Yeah, you do. The error code and the result.
I just wanted to say you have a great presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
No, everyone is here. I wanted to add one thing.